Welcome to our discussion about Pax Europiana EU37 and how to celebrate and how to commemorate the European past to be ready for a strong European future, because I strongly very much believe in a strong European Union, in a united continent, but we have to build that on a firm fundament, and for this we need a common agenda for celebrations and for commemorations, and somehow agree what happened in the past and how to work on it to be ready for this better future. I call this now the European Liberation Day, because the 8th of May should be officially designated in all European Union as the European Liberation Day. It marks the end of World War II. We can be very happy that the Allied forces have liberated Europe from this terrible terror regime of the Nazis and defeated Hitler and his regime, and this was the 8th of May. And it was not on the 9th of May. And it's very important that we celebrate united on the 8th of May, celebrate this every year, explain this for every generation to come, how terrible that regime was and how great we can be and that we were liberated by all Allied united. Yeah? Important, it was 5 Allied nations. It was the US, it was the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, it was France, and it was China. It was democratic China still, because only later the communists won in China, but it's important to mark that and also include all of them and mention them together. Because recently there is a little bit of a narrative that the Soviet Union was the main liberator, or somehow we should be all very grateful to the Soviet Union. This is not the case. Yeah? It was a joint effort, and it was very much led by the United States of America. And now let's make the second point, which is very important, that the same day we need a European Liberation Day officially marked on the 8th of May, we need also the European Freedom Day, and that's the 9th of November. That's the day when the Berlin Wall fell, and it's very important that the 9th of November was the day when we were liberated from the communist and Soviet terror in Eastern Europe. It's very important to have this kind of understanding: European liberation on the 8th of May, European Freedom Day on the 9th of November. And it's very important to understand that only Western Europe was fully liberated and free, because Eastern Europe stayed unfree and stayed occupied. And the Soviet tanks didn't move anywhere after the 8th of May, and they came to a standstill and they stayed exactly there for the next 45 years. Yeah? 46 years if you want. Yeah? And so this is very important that the liberation from one terror regime is of course very good, but to say to the next terror regime, then thank you very much for liberation and for occupying the next 46 years is very complicated to explain that to the Eastern Europeans and to anybody who learns about history for generations to come. And it somehow undermines our European case of freedom, rights, and morality values if we follow this kind of narrative, and it would be damaging. And also in this current conflict, a long-term conflict with Russia, with the Ukraine and occupation, if we then somehow define our whole identity about the World War II only, and also forget the Cold War, and then we are totally unresponsible and not serious to be taken. And then we celebrate the Soviet troops, we go to the Red Square, we celebrate the same soldiers who are killing people in Ukraine, Syria, Libya and elsewhere. No, that's certainly not possible. And celebrating, saying thanks to Putin 2020, when at the end of the day he is ordering this shooting down of MH17, when he is ordering this attacks on Crimea and in Syria, Libya and Eastern Donbass, so that's certainly not possible. So we have to be very carefully and very diligently what to celebrate when. European Liberation Day on the 8th of May. And then it's very important also that the World War II has ended in the 15th of August, yeah, after the Japanese capitulation. That's the end of the World War II, and it's not the 8th of May or the 9th of May or somehow like this. Because if we don't really seriously discuss these things, then it's not very serious ultimately, and that's important. Yeah? So what I suggest to mark is the 8th of May as Liberation Day, the 9th of November as European Freedom Day, and really say it like this, yeah? Name these days. Yeah? The United States of America has an official World Freedom Day for the 9th of November, and we in Europe not. It's not very good, yeah? So we have to have this European Liberation Day, 8th of May, European Freedom Day, 9th of May. And then, of course, you know, they're very good to have the 4th of April, the European Security Day, celebrate NATO establishment in 49 on the 4th of April everywhere, to celebrate it as European Security Day. Also the neutrals to say thank you to NATO and to the US for keeping us free, especially us Austrians, and also the Swedes and Finnish, and everybody, because that's really why the EU has been so successful, because of the NATO and US-backed security system. And also to make it very clear that the 9th of May is not to be focused on the World War II, because it's on the Schuman Foundation, on the positive achievements of the European unification, on Jean Monnet, on the ideas which have led to this prosperity, the common market and the common political cooperation between the French and the Germans, between the 6 countries in the beginning and now the 27 countries, and to have this narrative positively celebrated on the 9th of May. Of course, from the ashes of World War II, of course, in the confrontation with the Cold War and the Soviet Union, which unified us in the West, and of course, then later with the unity after the Cold War, which we have achieved, but to focus on that narrative on the 9th of May, and not to postpone it because Putin rolls the tanks on the Red Square. Let him roll the tanks, and not to go, not to celebrate with him, as long as he at least is aggressive to us, I mean, that the European leaders have accepted this invitation, which is now anyhow postponed, is an outrageous scandal of historic proportions. You know, that Macron and others are going there to celebrate what? In the year 2020, you know. We know exactly the crimes which were committed by the regimes before 45. We don't need the Russians to remind us. Let's focus on the crimes they commit every day today in Ukraine, or in Syria, Libya, or in Georgia. I mean, then to celebrate, in order to appease, to say thank you, that this evil regime of the Soviet Union at that time was an ally of convenience, and then to say thank you to Putin 2020 for that, is outrageous and really wrong to go to celebrate on that one. And luckily it was cancelled with Corona, but definitely we shall never go to this kind of events in the future. And this doesn't say to say thank you to all allies, for the liberation. Absolutely. This is very good, but on the 8th of May, when there's the right time for exactly this, and every year, and say it as a European Liberation Day. But it was only half of Europe liberated. The rest was immediately occupied again, and for a very long time of 45 years it was occupied, and we were very lucky that we could be free again on the 9th of November, when the Eastern Germans basically ran through this wall and liberated and united ultimately the European Union. So that's very important, these 2 days. And to discuss a bit about the major misconceptions. It's important to understand 75 years of World War II, it's important to understand how really this alliance has happened, Without the Soviet Union already being established in the year 1919 and 1920, and, unifying these whole resources of the Russian Empire, and trajecting power into Poland, with the aim to ignite the global revolution. Many of the things later happened, and as World War II would most likely not happen. The threat of the Soviet Union already there was the unifying power, which has led many of the European political systems to collapse into these terrible deeds. Very much, it was first the Soviet Union there. It was first the Soviet Union. They're already in the 20s, yeah, and it was Soviet tanks in Poland at that time, yeah, and this is really very important to understand, yeah. It was not the struggle of the good allies and the evil Nazis alone, Obviously, the Nazis were evil, yeah, but the allies were not all good. The Soviet Union was not a good system, no way. It was a terror regime. It was terrible. Nobody should be saying thank you to the Soviet Union as a good system. Yeah? It was an ally of convenience. There was no other ally with whom to work to contain and to defeat the terrible Nazis. Yeah? Obviously, it was necessary to work with the Soviet Union. But that was, the only alternative at that time. Yeah? And that was, well done from the allies and to form this alliance and to defeat. Yeah? But then to say anything good about the Soviet Union, that's impossible. Yeah? Nobody who believes in European values can say anything good about the Soviet Union. There's no way. And this is very important. In a country which then for later 45 years has threatened us with nuclear annihilation, yeah, and was at the Cold War threat from 46, if we want to make that date, yeah, and towards, that's a bit arbitrary, from the day the tanks stopped when they met with the Americans in the middle of the German border, to that moment when the Soviet Union fell, there was always this threat of complete destruction, just because we wanted to be free and we were living under a free society. I mean, this is outrageous. Who can say something positively? And celebrating Soviet successes in the year 2020, in the knowledge of all this, yeah, is completely against everything the European Union is about, yeah. So obviously, let's also debunk another myth, yeah, and it's very important to understand, yeah. It was, who could have stopped Stalin in 45 if he would have attacked the rest of Western Europe, yeah? I mean, it was the American capabilities of nuclear power which has led to this stopping. Nobody could have. The Americans were by far not able to stop completely and protect Western Germany at that moment, yeah? The troops of the Soviet Union were bigger. I mean, it's simply a question of distance and of the transport capacities, yeah? So we can be very happy, that there was no Soviet Europe in 45, yeah? Thank you, America, very much, yeah? That you were ready and defending. But also we have to say that when it comes to the question who won, it was very much the American support for the Soviet Union, which has made it possible for the Soviet Union to sustain the war effort financially, technologically, and also to have all this manpower equipped. Yeah? And this is very important to understand. So the whole myth that the Soviet Union has defeated the Nazis, yeah, I mean, there might be some, it's all a question of then a lot of technicalities ultimately, yeah? But just that you have so many people lost, yeah, cannot be the only criteria for the question of evaluating whom to say thank you more. And when you're ultimately an evil regime, then the alternative between two evils, yeah, okay, very good that you have defeated the one evil, but the next evil you brought along, I mean, and in the perspective of 2020, then to abuse that for Russian power projection and the Russian narrative of victimhood, yeah, it's totally wrong. I cannot express myself how wrong that is today. Yeah? Even Nikita Khrushchev, yeah, in this famous, when he took power later in the 50s, yeah, and he made his his famous 20th Congress, yeah, he even said very clearly how evil the Soviet Union, especially under Stalin, was. Yeah? And it got, of course, a little bit better than later, but still it was a very terrible enemy of the West. And it funded the wars from Vietnam to whatever, the confrontation in Cuba, the crackdown in Prague and in Budapest, and all this kind of lost 45 years. It was not only Stalinism, it was the Soviet Union itself, which was maybe then, of course, less evil when you want to say, but there was nothing good in the Soviet Union also under Gorbachev. This is also totally wrong. To see that in any way that's only for the really very communist left or confused people without any knowledge. I was in the 90s already 7 times in the falling Soviet Union and then in the emerging Russia, and I really have studied it as much as I could. Yeah, there was nothing good. It was a terror regime. The degrees of terrors varied according to the leader, but there was nothing good at all to be said in the retrospect. Yeah? And we have to debunk this myth because this is still very present in the minds of many, and it's totally wrong. So ultimately, thank you for liberation. We can be very proud. These terrible kind of ideas were defeated in the year 45. And I would like to say also personally, thank you for a free Austria. That was really amazing that I could live in freedom. And not, but I was from a different generation, my grandparents already. But nevertheless, thank you very much. But let's celebrate on 2 days. Let's have the non-free, the Liberation Day on the 8th of May, and the European Celebration Day on the 9th of May, and the European Freedom Day on the 9th of November. And let's make all these 3 days very official and mark it for generations to come, that it was really the liberation from the Nazi terror and the destruction of World War II. Thank you very much for that. It was the freedom which we then later in all of Europe was established thanks to the Eastern Germans, the Poles, the Hungarians, the Czechs, many who have then overthrown the Eastern communist regimes. And that's on the 9th of November. And let's celebrate every year again on the 9th of May the wisdom of these post-war leaders from France and Germany, from Adenauer, from Schuman, the Gasperi of Italy, many others, who really understood, with American support, with Jean Monnet as their mentor, to really how to unite Western Europe first, and then when it was possible to include Eastern Europe, to copy the success of the American internal market, of the continental unification process of America, to really build, at least trying, a similar prosperous, a similar free, a secure area where first time for a long time all Western Europeans, and now most of the Europeans who are already in the EU and NATO, can live free, prosperous, secure, and for the very long term. This is a major achievement, and that we want to celebrate on the 9th of May, and European-wide, and also with all our friends together, that this was possible to achieve, and not on the 9th of May to go to Mr. Putin and to celebrate the Russian troops with blood at their hands from Ukrainians, Syrians, Libyans and Georgians. That we shouldn't do. Thank you very much.